being yourself, um, being strong in your own convictions, your own authenticity,
Hmm.
trusting in your talent, knowing what you deserve in the 1960s as a Black trans woman is revolutionary. And it's important for those of us in this generation to know those stories so that we are more confident in our being, so that we are living more fully in our lives
Hmm.
as Miss Jackie Shane wanted. I think
Hmm.
that's part of why her legacy is so important. And on a personal note, to me, her representation, what she looked like, is similar to what I look like, and it
Hmm.
made me feel more real, more true, and allowed me to flourish as a trans woman, as an artist as well.
That phrase, "made me feel more real and more true" is a really beautiful phrase. I wanna come back to that because I think there's a lot just packed in just that little, sentiment in that part of the sentence. But Rodney, I'll go over to you. Why does Jackie Shane's story matter to you on a personal level?
I mean, I think her story is incredibly life affirming. I
Mm,
feel affirmed every time I talk about Jackie, every time I take her in. I feel seen, I feel present, I feel more here. I think there's a way that when we talk about trans individuals, queer individuals, anywhere, any individuals within the sort of gender and sexuality spectrum, we're often talked about when we lose our life, when we experience violence,
mm,
and we're often talked about in the context of struggle. And I think that many of us are trying not to feel so much struggle in our lives. And when you hear a story of an elder that preceded you by decades and that was living their lives authentically in the public eye, boldly, loudly, you can't not be affirmed. I think
mm,
for me as well as an adult whose gender journey was more recent, I really started thinking about and navigating my gender and realizing that I'm gender queer, which is somewhere along the non-binary spectrum, and trying to navigate that as an adult. It can be quite alienating sometimes, and it can be quite confusing.
mm.
And many of us go through our gender journeys all throughout our lives. We're going to be it's something that I think is a lifelong process, and to have seen an elder, an OG as we would call it in our community,
Yeah.
who was doing the thing and who was doing the thing that was for her in a system, in a context that was so violent. I'm like, if Jackie can do it, we can all do it. Let's all go on our own journeys. So there's something that's quite affirming and quite, dare I say it, inspirational about her story.
That's also a beautiful answer. I think like there's the idea of an elder adult, which is not a readily available example all the time for a lot of communities. Having an example like that of someone who said, you know what, I should choose to live the rest of my life the way that I would like to live it, and that includes withdrawing from the spotlight. By the way, is quite a radical choice to make. And we're going to come back to all of this stuff, but maybe Ravyn, I'll go to you on this. Like you played Jackie in the Heritage Minute a few years back, and you performed as her on stage a bunch of times. Talk to me about like this idea of like the physical, the psychological sensation, how it feels when you're channeling her.
Wow, it's been an honor
Hmm.
to be completely honest. It's been an honor to have the opportunity to represent her. That's more how I feel about my taking on the role in the Heritage Minute, and also bringing voice to her stories and her images through live performance as well, which is, a dream of hers. Before she passed away, she was planning this big tour, and
Yeah.
um, in an effort to introduce her to new audiences, um, I really had to understand the differences between us, the
Hmm.
differences in the way that we're living and the way we're allowed to live. Jackie existed at the brim of the box that she was allowed to in her time period.
Hmm.
And um, that image of her, those images in the 1960s specifically, um, the performance Jackie is a snapshot in her life. And although thrilling for me and remarkable for me, it was sort of a double-edged sword for her,
Hmm.
in that She was constantly coming up against people telling her who to be, how to be, when to take it off. And I'm sure it was painful for her to only be able to exist within that sort of brim, knowing what she deserved. Because you saw in the 1970s, when she left the spotlight, how much she started to glow in her photos in a completely different way.
Yeah.
That's softer, more demure, the less, you know, we weaponize our glamour sometimes. And I felt like that was the 1960s Jackie. And so for me in my journey, it mirrored it. It mirrored my wanting to be seen for my talent. It mirrored me walking away from situations that didn't serve me. I felt more confident in those choices. I respected myself more. And really, I've said this many, many times, but in the trans community, we have a saying called flowers while we're living. This idea that we
You said flowers while we're living. That was a
flowers while we're living. Yeah. It's this idea that we celebrate ourselves while we're alive. We celebrate each other while we're here.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to me that I came into sort of more prominence as an activist. Most people know me as an activist with Black Lives Matter Canada. And the flowers that I've received as a person have been through my portrayal of Jackie Shade. That was when I actually started to feel appreciated. That was when I started to be celebrated and tributed as well. And so it's interesting to have received flowers through her image. There's something really powerful about that. And I think she would really appreciate that too.
I just want to tell people who are listening on the radio that Rodney had like the loveliest little smiles. You're listening to that Ravyn sort of share that story. That was really lovely. Rodney, her breakout hit was called Any Other Way. I want us to just take a listen to some of it right now.
Tell her that I'm happy. Tell her that I'm gay. Tell her I wouldn't have it any other way.
Rodney, tell me a little bit about what she's doing with that song and why it's so revolutionary.
Yeah, I mean, I can't also hear that song without also hearing Ravyn's version. So now we've gotten to a point now in 2024 where codified, there are two versions, you know? It's kind of like, and I am telling you, you know, all of these like classics where there's like two iconic versions in your head now.
Yeah.
I mean, Jackie was singing in funk and soul. So even her genre that she chose itself is a quintessentially African-American experience. It's music that came from the South. It's music that is really understood and connected to by the diaspora. What I find really interesting about Jackie's performance, and particularly the song, is that she really embodies the essence of cool. And I say cool not just in the colloquial way that we use cool, but really what entomologists would say as like the essence of cool, which is a performance style and quality that is derived from the continent of Africa and that is imbued in a lot of African, North American aesthetics, performance styles. It means come to us. We're not going to come to you. So if you watch her performance, the one recording that we have of her, it's just so interesting that she's not doing quick feet like James Brown. She's not like hot energy. She's standing rooted, planted on the ground. She has one hand snapping. She's leaning on one hip, kind of like an auntie would. And she's singing, tell her that I'm happy, right? Like we all know that auntie, right?
Yeah.
That she's saying, tell her that I'm happy. Tell her that I'm gay, which, you know, is another sort of term for happy at that time. Tell her that I wouldn't have it any other way. That tells me that somebody that's assured, that's somebody whose artistry is who's so grounded and rooted. She doesn't really need to be doing kick, split, turn, jump. She's got it all here, and we as an audience are just being pulled into her. And that's what happens in the performance when you watch it. You naturally lean onto the screen, and that power is something that, you know, as artists, myself and Ravyn, we're both artists who are developing a craft and a practice, and that's stuff that comes with experience. That comes with maturity. That comes with knowing that you don't need to be doing much for an audience to be captivated by you.
Yeah.
And if you're just rooted and you're planted and you're just channeling yourself and all of the talent and the power and the ancestors and the magic that comes with you, that an audience is willing to sit back and to go for a ride with you. So it's really a masterclass for me, and grounded, rooted performance, and a masterclass on maturity on stage.
Yeah, the idea of cool, you know, when you say that and describe it that way, like the first person that comes to mind to me is Nina Simone, because Nina is someone who on stage, the feet are planted and she has the audience sort of drawn into her by like a flick of a wrist. Like there's no more movement needed, because everything, all the charisma is in the voice, is in the presence, and there's like, you just no longer need to do anything more in order to draw the audience in with you.
And so that's exactly, Nina Simone is a perfect comp for that. And really, jazz artists have, I believe, have really revolutionized the concept of cool. And even John Coltrane's albums really played on the essence of cool. And there really is power in just being. And knowing Jackie's story and knowing how much she had to fight for her being, knowing how much energy and labor had to come out of her need for existence, it makes a lot of sense that in her performance world, it's like this sacred space of just, here I am, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And audiences were taking it.
Yeah, of course. Ravyn, Rodney just alluded to the fact there's only one recording of her on film, and it was her performing that song. Kind of hard to recreate, create this entire documentary without a lot of archival footage. Then the filmmakers got around that by just making this incredible animation that to me really worked, because I found myself like really moved by the way that the animation was working. How did you feel seeing her brought to life that way through that animation and through that care in that animation?
I thought it was really creative, interesting, and really beautiful. It had the essence of like a storybook, you know?
It did.
And
it really did.
And I think that from what I understand of Jackie, she would have really appreciated that softness, that tenderness in the retelling of her stories. Something that's really powerful about the way that she performed is she only gave you bits and pieces of her story. She kept things really close to her chest at the same time. So in her music, you really have to listen deeply to what she's saying, to hear the pieces of her own story and the things that she was going through, that she was feeding into them. I think Any Other Way is an example of that. Tenement is an example of that. Raindrops, these sort of metaphors for deeper sorrow and a wanting to be held and seen. When I portrayed her in the Heritage Minute, I wasn't really trying to be her. My goal was for people to look her up. My goal was for people to be like, oh, this is a resemblance of someone who is an iconic figure in Canadian music history.
You wanted people to get curious about her. Sure.
Yeah, to get curious about it. So I trusted the people around me, the makeup artist, the costume designer, the directors, the writers, and I didn't see myself. When we were preparing for it, they were doing like test shots and all that, and I was like, I don't want to see myself, because when I look into the mirror as a trans woman, I'm always looking for myself. That's part of a important ritual for me, and so I can't look for Ravyn while trying to portray Jackie. I have to let Ravyn go, let her sit over here, and then take this up and be in this world and in this moment. And there was a moment while we were doing the shoot, we were about to record it, and as you see, I have these nails here, and I had nails on.
Were they nails that big? Because those nails, we should tell people listening on the radio, their nails are not short. Yeah. Okay, continue.
They're not short.
Yeah.
They're not short.
Yeah.
They're talons for sure. And which resembled Jackie in the 1970s, not in the 60s that we were trying to portray. And so because of that, I was getting my makeup done, I was sitting in a chair, and then we got the note, oh, Ravyn has to cut her nails. And there wasn't an actual clipper there. So they had to use scissors to cut my nails in person. And it was like it was necessary. I did what was necessary for Miss Jackie Shane.
Yes.
But it was hard. And even the makeup artist was like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And I said, I think that's because it is wrong. But this is part of it. This is part of what she had to go through. If they were checking nails for people who assumed male walking through clubs to see how long their fingernails were, it was that deep. And it made me think about like how restricted her boldness was. It was so bold, but it was still so restricted. And it gave me a lot of, that gave me enough to use from my own experiences to portray her.
I want to talk about that restriction in a moment, but first I should say, for folks who are just joining us, my name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion, and we are talking about Jackie Shane with two people who believe that she blazed a trail for them. Ravyn, Ariah, Wngz, and Rodney Diverlus are both with me now. Rodney, I want to talk about that restriction that Ravyn just laid out, because we didn't, like, the language that we have now was not the language that we had in the 60s. And so in the 60s, Jackie Shane would have been read as a black, gay, cross-dressing man. That was sort of how people received her at the time. But she, at the time, did not use that language. To her mother, she used she. To herself, she used she. To people who loved her, she used she. And in fact, you get to a point where the cost of being told what you are for Jackie Shane was so much that she ended up walking away. But even before she walked away, we should talk about some of the crucial moments in her career. So we should talk about the fact that she refused to do Ed Sullivan because they wanted her to perform without makeup. She said no to the biggest show in America. She turned down American Bandstand also because they wouldn't allow black people in the audience when they were inviting her on the show. She said, you know, like, how dare you use our music but not allow us to actually be in the show and actually dance. These shows would have made her an instant star, would have made her an immediate instant star in America. She turned them down. What do you make of that choice and the choices that Jackie Shane was making at the time, Rodney?
I mean, these are impossible choices. And like you were saying, that these shows would have made her a global superstar. Yeah. And I always think, at what cost? And I'm sure Jackie was thinking, at what cost? Yes. I think when I think back to this question, I always think about, you know, in our community, we always joke, there's the classic Kendrick Lamar opening song line, all my life I had to fight. Yeah. And you know, it's classic. We all know it. It's the beginning of We Gonna Be All Right. And you know, at some point, I think all of us within the margins are realizing that that's a reality for us, that we're actually the need to just live by one's principles and what one believes often means that one has to contend with whether or not this decision or this opportunity is the right vehicle for me, or do I swallow what it is I know is true within myself to do X, Y? At what cost? Yeah. And I mean, I think Jackie was incredibly ahead of her time, but I also think that there were thousands of Jackies that were all around that we don't know. And so I know for me in 2024, 6 decades later, I've had moments where there have been offers at the table, where there have been both in the performance space and then as an activist, that I had to contend with. This would be a vehicle that would get me to a bigger audience. This would allow me to do X, Y, Z. This would bring in this much income. But it would require me to go against everything that I believe in. It would require me to literally forget about my principles, forget about my identity, forget about my community to do X. At what cost? And so these are the things that we always, you know, we're talking about the flowery, the beautiful things about Jackie, but what I think has to be really important as part of her narrative as well is the sacrifice and the cost. And what purpose for her, if her audience, if she's wanting to connect with Black communities, if she's wanting to be her true authentic self, if she has gone through the gender journey that is often quite painful and difficult, what is the purpose then of moving backwards to satisfy a need for fame, for X, Y, Z, a need for money, a need for visibility? So I actually think that it shows me just how deep her integrity was, how deep her values were, and how those were important for her. And we talk about her stepping back as well. We as an audience obviously long for what could have been, but if you spend your entire practice and your entire career fighting an uphill battle, at some point you have to, one has to realize they're not their career. And she probably chose herself. He probably chose her. She probably chose her dreams, her desires, her needs. Her personhood came before Jackie, the artist. I think it's just such an incredibly difficult ask to ask people. And no matter what decisions she made, I can imagine a situation in which there's probably longing and there's probably imagining what would have happened if she, but ultimately to me, I get the sense that she chose herself. She chose wanting to live with herself and wanting to look at herself in the mirror and being okay with what she saw rather than chasing the dollars and chasing the fame.
It seems like an incredible and absolutely like difficult choice to make, but I think like the way that you said it is at a certain point you got to just choose yourself. You got to be able, even if somebody is knocking at your door and they're saying all your dreams can come true tomorrow, and then you got to say, is it going to cost me myself, and if so, is it worth it? Ravyn, Rodney, I really appreciate you guys being here. This has been a delight. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So great.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having us. Great conversation.
Of course. Ravyn, Ariah, Wngz, and Rodney Diverlus talking about their deeply personal connections to Jackie Shane and her legacy. Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story is screening in Toronto as part of the Hot Docs Festival on April 27th and 28th and May 4th.
Here you come again, and you say that you're my friend, but I know why you're here.
And that is it for the show today. Remember, you can listen to this show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're joining us on YouTube and this is your first time, it's a delight to have you. Thank you so much. On Instagram, we are at Commotion CBC. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. Hey, we are going to be back tomorrow. I hope to see you then.
Any other way.